This week's panel is a trio of cancer-fighting crusaders. One raises money, one's innovation is transforming patients' lives, and the third is benefiting from a breakthrough new treatment. All of them are winning the fight against cancer. Yushi Kessler is a former Olympic athlete turned Olympic figure skating coach. She's also a two-time cancer survivor and the founder of Pennies in Action. It's a nonprofit that has raised over $1 million for breast cancer research. Dr. Brian Cernicki, along with his team at the University of Pennsylvania, is determined to make cancer history. They've created a revolutionary experimental breast cancer vaccine that's toxin-free, has no significant side effects, and utilizes a patient's own white blood cells to fight the disease. His clinical trials have resulted in tremendous success. Also joining us is Melissa Nicholas, a cancer patient who's currently participating in one of his cancer vaccine trials. She's someone who knows firsthand the benefits and promise of this life-changing and potentially life-saving treatment. Welcome to Full Frame, all three of you. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Melissa, let me start with you because before the interview I said, I just want this to be a casual conversation. If there's anything that he says, just jump right in. And then, of course, the doctor said, well, what if she throws something at me, which was funny. But you said, I'd never throw anything at him. He saved my life. I think that's got to be the greatest thing anyone can ever hear. Talk to me about hearing you've got cancer and then meeting him in this journey that you've been on, because it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll try not to get too emotional. And even just you mentioning that stirs up a great amount of emotion in me. When I first heard about this treatment, I knew that it was going to be the beginning of removing the threat of cancer, and that it was amazing, that I wanted it for myself, and now that I've had it, I want it for everyone else. That's why I'm here.
Walk us through this process, and don't get all like doctory on us, because we want to be able to understand it. How does it work?
The simple answer to this is we just reprogram the immune response that the cancer co-opted so that the cancer could survive. And we basically take some of the patient's white blood cells and re-educate them out of the body and inject them back in. And after 5 or 6 injections, the patient's immune response begins to build back up to where it was in a healthy individual and fights the cancer.
Yushi, you're an amazing story. I mean, tuberculosis, 2 forms of cancer, and the picture of health. But you weren't involved in this process. How did you find out about him? And talk to me about the linkage of these 3 people sitting on this couch.
Well, Dr. Cernicki was my doctor when I had breast cancer, and he did the surgery. And when I came to him, I said, I'll do anything you ask me to do, but I will do nothing that kills my immune system. Because it was at the time when the bird flu was coming. I said, you might save me from cancer, and then the bird flu is going to get me. So that didn't make sense. And so 2 years later, person from Penn called me and said, Dr. Cernicki wants to talk to me about his research, because he already had the vaccine, but I was ER positive. I'm a different type of breast cancer, like estrogen-based, and they didn't have the vaccine for that yet, and hopefully soon I will get it. So anyway, so I went to see him and listen to what he had to say. It made total sense. Like you said, it's so simple. And anything, when you understand something, it becomes extremely simple. And it's not a complex thing. And so anyway, so he had run out of money, which didn't make sense to me. Why would you run out of money when you have something that shows a progress, a promise, and so forth? And coming from sports, I said, I don't have really any experience in fundraising, but I'll give it a try. So then I thought, well, I have to use what I know best, and that's, trying to get somebody to the top. And the only way you can win is if you beat your opponent at its own game. So, and that's how that all came about. And so we kind of started from the beginning to do a different way, because cancer starts with 1 cell, it divides, and wealth starts with 1 penny. And so that's how we started.
But one of the things that she hit on that really it just kind of knocks my socks off is he ran out of money. There's so much money out there for cancer research. How is that possible?
Well, there is a limit, and not an unlimited source of money. There's certain funding sources, and as you get further on in your career, there may be less money available from federal sources such as NIH. And as dollars shrink from Congress and the NIH budget, research money becomes scarce and it becomes difficult to get. Even good ideas can't get funded because there's a funnel of research dollar inhibition that can limit good ideas. And in addition, a lot of the dollars are small pots of money to start research, but when you get to the point where we had to do some larger clinical trials, those dollars become more difficult to get because you need larger pots of money, and often you transition into the pharmaceutical industry and drug companies to pick up that kind of research to do it. But the research we do with it being personalized and individual and cell processing is not something that most pharmaceutical companies would be willing to jump in. It's a whole new direction. And so, it's different.
It's an important.
And since we started, actually, the FDA approved the first dendritic cell vaccine, Provenge, a couple of years ago. So it's on the cusp of becoming standard therapies, but we're just not quite there yet.
And of course, this would be the case of pennies from heaven in your case.
Pennies in action.
No, but I'm saying pennies from heaven, because those pennies grew and grew and grew. I mean, it must have seemed pretty incredible all of a sudden.
But see, they all laughed at us because like everybody laughed at me and said, how will you help solve cancer with pennies? I said, well, first of all, I had to learn this. I had to learn how this works. And you can't jump in when there's all these major foundations that have millions of dollars and everybody's already used to giving to them. So you can't go about it the same way. Now, the one thing that blew me away is that coming from sports, the better you get, the less you have to worry about funding. Now, in this, the more success he had, the less funding he had. That makes no sense.
None.
None whatsoever. And then, then actually he was always, at the threat of being shut down. And as a patient, and then I'm waiting, like 7 years, I'm paying this forward to get my vaccine. And now after 7 years, he's in this for 10 years, people come to us and say, how come I never heard of this? I mean, this is horrible. This is horrendous. And, Melissa can tell you the difference. She had both. She had regular treatment and care, and then she had this. I mean, it's just unreal, the difference. And we as patients want what he has to offer.
And, well, why don't you talk about that? And the interesting thing is, I love what you just said, because I think you're probably the same way. Coaches don't look at, this is the problem, here's our solution. You're problem solvers, and I love how you describe that. And it doesn't make sense, because when it comes to sports, how you do, success is rewarded. In this case, it's kind of backwards. But talk to me about before and then after.
So with my traditional treatment, I often make the joke that, after I would lose my lunch, but with the immunotherapy, I would go out to lunch. So it was quite true. You had to really watch what you would have after chemotherapy, because your stomach, your whole system is very upset, and you don't have to worry about that at all with immunotherapy. The most taxing part for me of the immunotherapy was getting to Philadelphia, which is very unnerving to me, that it's such an easy treatment. Just going to, you have your white blood cells harvested, which that's a couple of hours, and that you're laying there having that pheresis is what it's called, done. That's probably the most difficult part of the whole thing, which is really similar to the amount of time it takes for one infusion treatment for chemotherapy. So it's quite easy. I mean, after that, you come in and get your shot, 6 shots over 6 weeks, and then in this particular trial, I'm getting 3 booster shots. So again, the most difficult part for me as the patient is to get to Philadelphia, because I live in Florida. Now, that's why, I feel like a survivor of the Titanic. I'm in the lifeboat, and I want to help the people in the icy water that can't get to the lifeboat. That's my charge. I want to really get that message across to the viewers that, we need the help to get this. We're a few $1 million away, and then the cancer, funding, that should be a drop in the bucket for some of these other foundations just to step forward and help us fund this phase 3 of this trial so we can get it in multiple cities and get those couple hundred patients able to get to those cities and be treated.
And we get like people from all over the world that want this. But the biggest problem now is, like Melissa says, is people can't get there. It's very expensive to fly to Philadelphia. And the thing what was always cool, like I would pick her up at the airport and she'd get her shot, and then we'd go out to eat, and then I'll take her back to the airport and she'd fly home. You can't do that with regular treatment. And she wasn't sick. And all the patients will say the same thing. And I cannot believe that this is not being helped to move forward, because we cancer patients want this. But I know, cancer is a huge industry, and there's so much money being made, and they love it that it's a chronic disease. We patients do not want it a chronic disease. I said to Dr. Zanicki at the beginning, I said, it seems that the medical community shortens our good life to elongate our bad life, because there's so many people that didn't even know they have cancer. They feel really great, and then they get diagnosed, and then all of a sudden the horror starts. Whereas with this is it. It's biodegradable. People have no side effects. The first shot, they sometimes have some chills, and that's it. But this is why I don't think there's any doctor in the world that's supported like Dr. Zanicki by the Crusaders, because we know this is what we want.
But you talked about individualized, personalized, and I've talked to people in the field who say, pretty much the doctor you come in, you're presenting, I've got cancer, he looks at the charts, well, 60% of the people respond to this well. It's a dart throw. It's hope. Well, I hope this works. But it's very different from what you're doing. How come we aren't on your road? How come so many people are out there saying, I want to get on the lifeboat, but I'm on the Titanic. And, well, you want to jump in.
Yes,
and he already knows he's got to be quiet when the women talk, so go right ahead.
Well, I think when we moved from horses to cars, I'm pretty sure the blacksmiths were not out there really happy about the cars coming. And so, we're on the chemo horse, right? And we're moving to the immunotherapy car. And so, that change does not happen without somewhat of a revolution, somewhat of a crusade. That's why we call ourselves Crusaders.
But see, the problem with this is so that when she uses this example of the car and, the horses, nobody died. This way, 1,500 people a day die of cancer. And by people slowing this up, they never get a chance after this. That's the problem, and that's what we are so upset about. Anybody that doesn't speed this up, because my grandson said at 12 years old, he says, Omi, he says, so just so people get more money, others are not allowed to live. And that's exactly how the kids feel.
One final question for you, Doctor. I can remember in the late 90s interviewing a young doctor, a woman who was in her 40s, who was retiring, getting out of the business altogether. And she said to me, and her patients, HIV/AIDS patients, she said, you get close to these patients and you go to their funerals, and it's just too tough to take. Having lost patients along the way, which I know you have, what is the feeling sitting here on a couch, flanked by these two wonderful women, knowing that, you're giving them hope, another chance? I mean, it's got to be a great feeling.
When patients get an opportunity to live and return to their normal life, I've done my job as a physician. So it gives me a great sense of pride to be able to help patients. And it's tough. We still, breast cancer is not completely cured, but we are making strides in it, and there's less deaths today than there were even 10, 15 years ago, thanks to some of the more targeted therapies.
Okay, I've learned my lesson. Never leave a show without giving the women a chance to chime in. Any thoughts, final thoughts from either of you?
I'm waiting for my vaccine because I had uterine and breast cancer. And the vaccine he's working on now would help me, but every time I go for my checkup, I think, geez, is it coming back? Is it coming back? And just to see, because, you know, oh, it's always for the good of the patients that it's slow. It's not. Because, you know, power of positive thinking, but, you know, it only can go so far. And like I said, you know, he calls it immunorestoration, and that's really what it is. So, because some people think it's, you know, it's a vaccine, but it's basically what it does. It restores your immune system to where it's supposed to be. And I just can't believe that the funding isn't there, that people can get this. He has over 90 patients that all have had, it was successful with all of them, and we know a whole bunch of them. And this is amazing. When we have a dinner in April, a lot of them come, and to see that all these people, you know, are in the lucky club, as we call it. Because when I go with them to a mammogram, they're not scared like everybody else. I'm scared. Everybody's scared. When Melissa got her shot, she stayed at my house the next day. The euphoria she felt was unbelievable. I want to feel that euphoria. You know what I mean? And to know that Dr. Sinicki has this, and he can help other people in other cancers with this, because it's going to work for all cancers. I mean, what are we going to say someday to the kids? Oh, you could have had your parents, but it just wasn't important enough to put the money there. That is my crusade in this. And not, you know, something. And I said, when we started Pennies in Action, if we can do this one day earlier, then it would be, we saved 1,500 people. Who can say that? And Dr. Sinicki is on the way to not just breast cancer. His, you know, his protocol will work with all the other solid tumors. Do you know what I mean? And, you know, why aren't people helping?
Well, hopefully this broadcast will help.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you all so much. Very moving. When we come back, a look at why conventional cancer treatments may be doing more harm than good.